Right, John Kennedy is in the frame to be Celtic's sporting director. Guys, that is what we're going to chat about on today's video. You know the face in the middle, it is the face of 67 Hale Hill's very own David, and it's not just me and David today because we've got a new member of 67 Hale Hill. We've got Sean joining us as well. So Sean, I will let you kick us off, mate. Talk to us about these reports we're hearing last night. John Kennedy could be Celtic's next sporting director. It kind of came out the blue a wee bit. What do you make of it? Because the general fan consensus hasn't been massively positive.
No, I mean, it was a bit of a strange one reading the news last night. Just in terms of, obviously, John Kennedy's been a loyal servant to Celtic. He's been at the club since, I think, 1998, if I'm correct in saying. And obviously, he's worked in pretty much every single role at the club, playing to going through the coaching, scouting teams to ultimately being interim manager now. But in terms of a director of football role and moving forward in terms of the long-term progression of the football club, you would probably rather have someone with a bit of experience in the role, or at least somebody who Eddie Howe's maybe previously worked with. But to be honest, I'm kind of torn on it because John Kennedy obviously has certain qualities that you can see in terms of the way that he speaks and the way that he sees the game, the way that he kind of visualises Celtic going forward. And I think in some aspects he's been able to sort of exert that onto the way that we've been playing in recent weeks since coming in terms of like chance creation and that. But recruitment wise, obviously, it's like you've got to factor in so many different aspects of the actual functionality of the club, and I'm just not sure whether John Kennedy is necessarily the best candidate. But obviously, I'm kind of torn on it myself, to be honest.
He's been a player, he's been a scout, he's been under 19 coach, he's been development coach, he's been first team coach, he's been assistant manager, he's currently interim manager. I kind of come at it as the same way as you, Sean. I don't necessarily have any ill feeling towards John Kennedy, but I just wonder if there's a better option out there, someone who's had experience in the past of dealing with recruitment and dealing with non-coaching roles. And as much as Kennedy was a scout briefly at Celtic, I don't think he really has much of that experience. David, what's your kind of early thoughts on this?
It didn't overly surprise me seeing the report because I think it's quite clear that Celtic would like Kennedy around in some capacity. I think in terms of the sporting director role, it's an interesting one in terms of Kennedy's perspective because he's always spoke about having the ambition of being a future Celtic manager. He would have to park that if he was to take the sporting director role because in order for him to be a Celtic manager, he's going to have to go out and earn his stripes elsewhere at a lesser club and try and build himself a CV that merits being the Celtic manager. I don't think anything he could do as a sporting director or director of football, whatever we want to call it, I don't think anything he could do in that role would make him viable to be a Celtic manager when he's finished with it. And for me, I can understand the sort of negative reaction to it, though. This idea of it doesn't really reflect well on the recruitment process if Kennedy is somehow the best option for the sporting director role. It doesn't really suggest we've cast the net far and wide. But it doesn't really wind me up. Like you were saying, he's held 8 or 9 roles at the football club. And, we don't really know what Celtic want from the director of football. We don't really know what Kennedy's remit would be. So it's difficult to kind of judge whether he is suitable for the role because we just don't know what Celtic want from him or want from that position. So I think it's an interesting one. I think a lot of fans will come down negative on it, but I think that will more be down to the fact that they don't like anyone at Celtic being untouchable, and Kennedy feels untouchable. So I think if he was to get that job, it would reek a jobs for the boys kind of culture, but it doesn't truly wind me up because Kennedy clearly has something that a lot of coaches he's worked with really like. I don't know what it is, but I certainly wouldn't, use his history to sort of go against him. And I don't think you can judge what he's done as a manager or as an interim boss, some of the basic mistakes he's made. I don't think you can use that to say he shouldn't get the job either because it's a totally different role. So I'm not sure if he's qualified to take the role because I just don't know what Celtic want from it. So for me personally, I'm sort of sitting on the fence with it because I'd feel a bit silly to go down either way.
Yeah, I mean, I think the key point is how it's perceived by supporters, and I think you hit the nail on the head with that. It just doesn't look particularly great when you see someone going through all these different roles at Celtic and, you know, never leaving the club despite what happens. It's probably a good point to bring in the comments, or more the fact that Brendan Rodgers recommended John Kennedy for the role of sporting director in 2019. So Brendan Rodgers clearly thought that John Kennedy, someone who he had worked with for a number of years, someone who he thinks quite highly of, was suitable for that job. I don't think, as much as the Celtic support in general don't have much goodwill towards Brendan Rodgers, I don't think we can write that report off as being nothing. I think that's quite telling. But I think you raise probably the most interesting point, David, with regards to what does Kennedy want to do. We never really hear John Kennedy talking about his future or his future in general, whether it be at Celtic or away from Celtic. He's very quick to shut that down. And every time he's done a press conference and been asked a personal question since he's been Celtic interim manager, he's very much said, it's not about me, it's about the team. So nobody really knows, but that doesn't stop us from speculating, guys. What do you think John Kennedy wants his future to be, Sean? Does he want to be Celtic manager one day? And if so, as David says, surely he can't go into this director of football job.
Yeah, I mean, I have to agree somewhat in terms of that aspect of things. I mean, obviously the reports when he was getting linked with Hibs a couple of years ago, he was reportedly linked quite heavily with them and was considered by them to be a sort of viable candidate for their long-term future. And I just think personally, in terms of his managerial career, if I was him, I would want to go and earn my stripes elsewhere because he's probably done all he can at Celtic because he's not going to get the managerial job. In terms of Celtic are going to go and try and bring in a high calibre candidate to securitise the future of the club next season and ultimately try and reclaim the Scottish Premiership title and try and make strides in the Champions League. But I just think with Kennedy, you know, like there's potentially jobs like the Dundee United job maybe going to be available at the end of the season. Maybe one of the clubs who, like, even if it was like a Scottish Championship side, if I was him, I would want to go and I would want to be my own man because ultimately his managerial ambitions, as you say, are going to have to be parked somewhat if he's going to take the director of football role, if that's something that is definitely going to happen or is a possibility. Yeah, I mean, whether he could be the Celtic manager one day, I'm not sure, but I think he just needs to go and see if he has the mettle and the experience to actually be able to conclusively say, right, the qualities that we see in Kennedy as a coach can in the future be sort of put towards him being the Celtic manager. But I just think he needs to go and earn his stripes personally.
David, what would he have to do to be Celtic manager? What would he have to do at another club? And is there not an argument that when you look at someone like Scott Brown, who's gone into coaching now, that he may always be, you know, second or third in the queue with regards to being Celtic manager whenever the job comes up in subsequent years?
I mean, it's a good point, but to be honest, James, I don't think you can actually pick out specifics and say this would qualify you to be the Celtic manager. It's all about what he would show with regards to his full package as a manager, and whether you felt that the way he makes his teams play, whether you would want his style at Celtic Park. He needs to show for me that he can be a success elsewhere. I think he needs to go down to a lower ranked Scottish Premiership club. I think that would be a good starting point. And I'm not saying he should get the Celtic job in 2 or 3 years either. I think you're talking 6 or 7 down the line. I think it would be a long-term wait for John Kennedy. He does want to be Celtic manager. That's something he's openly said. I get the hunch though. It's just a feeling. It's just based on how I feel towards Kennedy. I get a vibe he would jump at the chance to stay at Celtic in any capacity. I think it's very easy for John Kennedy throughout this speculation to have come out and said, I'm not going to be here next season because I want to go elsewhere and I want to earn my stripes as a manager. He's not committed to that yet. And I'm pretty sure he knows he's no chance of getting the Celtic job permanently at the minute. So it's interesting with regards to how Kennedy might think. I do think if he does get given the role, he needs to be given some sort of opportunity. He can't be hounded from the first minute. I think there is a lot of toxicity towards Kennedy, and I think we've discussed where it comes from. But it's not a case of he's just been given a lot of these first team roles, Hamish. I think a lot of people forget that when Brendan Rodgers came in, John Kennedy had to pass an interview. He had to go and speak to Rodgers, and it was apparently a professional style interview that he had to pass. Rodgers didn't just turn around and say, "Oh well, I need to keep John Kennedy because the club have told me to." That was entirely at Rodgers' discretion whether he was part of the first team setup. So Kennedy he's not just been given everything, he has earned some of these jobs that he's held. Not all of them. I think Celtic did feel sympathy for his injury, and that's why they kept him on, how his career went. But I think with regards to all of that, I think he needs to be put in some perspective. And if Kennedy does get this role, if he wants it, he needs to be given some time and understanding and not hounded from the first minute.
The report said that John Kennedy was in the frame to be Celtic Sporting Director. The chat is also that Fairgo Harkin is also in that same frame for the role, but it seems unlikely that Richard Hughes will be joining Eddie Howe, if indeed Eddie Howe does come to Celtic. Is Fairgo Harkin still your number one choice for this role, based on what you've heard, Sean?
Yeah, definitely. I think, obviously, in terms of the connections that you'll have with the Manchester City elite development squad and youth players across the Premier League too as well, that's a potentially really good avenue recruitment that Celtic could utilise. And I think ultimately, if we want to create a conveyor belt of talent that is going to be able to be sold on for, very good sums of money, you know what I mean? 7-figure, kind of 8-figure sums, when we need to be outsourcing these options from every available avenue, and a lot of those players that we could acquire from there would either be available for very kind of generous fees, or they might even be out of contract, as some of the Manchester City elite development squad at the moment are. But yeah, I just think in terms of the links between Celtic, Peter Law, like the City Football Group and everything else, I think Ronnie Dyler was potentially kind of brought in off the back of those sort of links and stuff like that. I just think it would make a lot of sense. I think that it's probably the most progressive route for the club to go down, and ultimately I think as supporters that's what we want to see. So yeah, definitely Fairgo Harkin is my number one. I'm sure it'll probably be you guys as well, but see what happens, I suppose.
Can only speak for myself, but he's my number one. David, what about you?
Yeah, he reads well, doesn't he? And his background reads well, and he does seem to fit into what Celtic would like, you'd imagine. But again, we just don't know who the number one candidate is. I think what's essential is that Eddie Howe isn't picking that particular role. That's not what a director of football's for. Someone for the manager to pick. I don't like the sound of that at all, because I think personally, guys, for me, we want to avoid a situation like when Rodgers left and the club was in a total mess. The whole structure of it had blown up, and if Howe was to do that, if Howe was to one day leave the club and perhaps Richard Hughes with him, then you're just back to square one. I would much rather there wasn't too much of a relationship between the two. So I think Fairgo Harkin does read really well. He has some terrific experience under his belt, and the link Sean is sort of put forward there totally backs that up. So yeah, I would probably agree.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's most Celtic fans want to get Eddie Howe in as our next manager, and we're willing to make some concessions for him, getting in his own backroom team and all that kind of stuff. But I think you're right, David. We don't want to go overboard, and we don't want a repeat of the situation where Brendan Rodgers leaves and brings all the people with him, and Celtic are kind of left scratching their head a little bit. So,
does it not say a lot about how this club's been run over the last few years that we're talking about Concessions being the manager picking his own backroom staff? I mean,
yeah, that's a good point.
That's something that should be 101.
It's a good point. But yeah, hopefully we get a bit of movement on the Eddie Howe front and director of football. In one word, guys, do you think we'll get these in a double announcement? Do you think that's what their hold up is? Do you think they're going to announce director of football and manager in the one announcement?
No.
No, I
This
would
is
love
my
to think
bubble,
so,
guys.
but
Come on.
I mean,
I don't think they've ever before a new season. I don't think they've ever appointed a manager sort of earlier than May. Certainly in terms of modern history, I don't think anyone's been appointed in April, for example. So I don't think there's as much of a hold up as we feel there maybe is. And
Yeah. I think
so
it's just because Lennon was sacked Lennon left so early. It seemed like it's dragged on for so long. But I think you're right.
they've generally given interim managers. I think they've always given interim managers the chance to just see the season out first. Just another trend that's happened in Celtic's history. So I don't think there's too much of a hold up, but we'll see. Hopefully we hear something next month.
Yes, indeed. Right, guys, thanks for joining me. A couple of wee bits of housekeeping I just want to get through before the end of the video. Big thanks to the Celtic Trust and Celtic Shared and the Celtic State of Mind last night for having us on for the chat about the shares proposal that the Celtic Trust and Celtic Shared have put to the club. You can watch that in its entirety on the Celtic State of Mind YouTube channel. I thought it was quite an interesting discussion. So a big thanks to them for having us on, and also a big thanks to everyone who's subscribed in the last day. We've gone up, I think, about 300 subs in the last 24 hours after the Eddie Howe video yesterday. So if you're a new subscriber, welcome to the channel. You are very welcome. We'll be back tomorrow with another video. It's a big derby preview with Jackie McNamara. We'll speak to you then.